Tahi atu, kia ora, Nisa Bulavinaca. Today's Talanoa panel, we have Whila Formatu, Ravinda Hunuya, Mama and daughter duo Jodie Cameron and Jason Tinney. We're talking about Māori and Pacifica women in sport leadership and governance. Jodie, we're going to come to you first. Obviously leading at High Performance Sports New Zealand now, but being part of obviously basketball royalty with the tall ferns. Can you speak to us a little bit of what that kind of leadership means to you?
For me, leadership is around the bigger picture, macro, visionary, strategy, always seeing ahead, being ahead of the game, and in that view of what that would look like for them and future-proofing the generations to come. But also means, having that mindset forward, but working on the ground. So you've got that macro view, but it's really the micro, bringing people with you. So leadership's a balance of those things, looking forward and pulling along, and on a daily working with the people that you are to make sure that you bring the best out of them so that they become the future leaders to bring the next lot through.
Kind of touches on the point, Whila, that you've obviously started, you were in Samoa and you worked at the Ministry of Sport and Culture. There was a connection between what Jodie was talking about, that grassroots level straight into government in Samoa. Can you talk to us a little bit about what was beneficial for that?
When I think about Samoa, there's no kind of the government's here and the people are here. It's you're on the ground, you're in the community. So, but you're fortunate to have then a role that can support people on the ground. So, I kind of see my role here in New Zealand. You can have people who are working in government who might not be at the grassroots, but the decisions are being made that can influence people. So I think having people who, as Jodie was saying, at the micro level to the macro level, having that understanding is really beneficial for the positions that you might have in government.
From a Samoan lens, that's definitely your experience, but from a Māori's perspective, how is that kind of idea of being collective and bringing everyone kind of on your journey shaped your own kind of navigating of the women in sport industry?
It's actually very similar to what you've both said about the collective and the people. And something you actually said off camera was that we do things without realising it. We naturally have that embedded in us, that we are the role models, we are looking at people because that's just how we were raised. It's how our parents raised us. It's what culture doesn't demand it of us, but it's just how we've always rolled. So when you take that into places like Sky or being a journalist or whatever, I was a little bit shell-shocked, I must be honest, because I started my career at Whakaata Māori, so kaupapa Māori, I was very comfortable there. We walk into the office, take off our shoes, they have karakia in the morning, all these sorts of things. And then I took a leap of faith and went to News Hub, and I was just like, no one else there looked like me, no one else there talked like me, no one else there told stories like me. So I'm like, okay, here we go. So that was a learning for me, and finding out about me and what I stood for, and me as a wahine and all of those sorts of things before I ever thought about imparting any of that on anybody else. I feel our Pacifica, our Māori women do come to me for advice, or do want to catch up for a coffee, and do want to know, what I did and how that could kind of help their pathway, because it's the unknown in a mainstream, Pākehā industry. It's hard to know where you kind of fall in line with things.
Well, we want to take it to Jason now then about that, because you're saying basically like we get it from our parents, or we're role modelled from our environments. Lovely, beautiful mother hair. Clearly learnt from the best, Jason. Can you kind of speak to what you probably picked up in terms of being raised with your mum, and how that shows up in your own leadership style?
She was a single mother, so it's like she could just get everything done and do everything, and obviously I would see that and think, oh, okay, I can naturally do everything too, and kind of follow in her footsteps. And I just watch her around the home, even kind of how she is with people and interacts. And it's funny because everyone says I'm like her, but we disagree with that. We think, no, we're not like each other. But it's like, she's just been an example of that, and I've naturally picked it up. Kind of as you mentioned, it's just something that you fall into. And I think she always told me, like, you need to do what needs to get done. And it doesn't matter how you feel, kind of what you're going through, you know, feel it and still do it anyway, you know, and still keep going. And it's like that relentlessness, that never give up. As well, like you just keep going, don't let nobody knock you down or anything, you know, and how can you come back better if you do get knocked down or you do find something hard. So
what are the other kind of skills that you think you got from do you think we're going to put her on the spot? Yeah. Okay, I'm successful. But you do. Yeah. So the other kind of skills that you think you picked up from you know, that helped you even when you had to go over to the States for sport?
I think thinking about more than just myself.
But as an athlete, you kind of have to be a little bit selfish as well to try and get there, to get to a level that that you're competing at like an elite level. Jodie, do you agree with that, or can you speak to your experience about trying to manage like being selfish, but then also having to still care for people around you?
Sometimes you have to make those decisions, but knowing that, you know, in Te Ao Māori, you've got your po holding you there. Or, you know, my mum was that. She's like, yeah, go. Like, because you always know where home is. And I always wanted that for my children. And so our way is being athletes, you know, through sports. So it comes, you have to be selfish, you know, whatever terminology you're comfortable with, you know, it's an investment in what you do. But I think the important thing is with our culture and our upbringing and what we relate to and how we operate is that you never forget where you come from and that you always come back to give back. You know, I'm pretty hard, so I'm like firm in what it takes to get to be the best. And it's not everyone can do it. So being selfish is actually the way to be in terms of being successful as an athlete. But what that represents to everyone is different.
Have you feel like then, Fila, on the other side of how do you kind of, if you are challenged with that, how do you personally then manage that kind of, you know, a little bit of a tug of war of, I have to be selfish and do this, but at the end of the day, I'm hopefully going to be bringing all our communities together.
I was trying to think of the word, like you have to work on yourself. So, and then that, I guess, relates to that role modelling. Like, if I work on myself, then I will model, you know, a behaviour that is acceptable. So I played touch rugby for Samoa, and then I also did powerlifting. And I had a struggle because in touch, I have my team. So not that I hide behind them, but everyone had like a role and a place. And so I was on the wing. I just got to catch the ball, you know, or I've just got to drive it. But when in powerlifting, it's just you by yourself on the platform. And so the struggle was I can't hide. So I've really got to work on myself to do well. But I also had a why. So my why was I was the first woman to powerlift in Samoa. And so there was that, I guess, responsibility or role modelling that, hey, you can do it. Even though my mum didn't like it, she goes, oh, that's ugly. But then she also supported me because that whole concept of a woman lifting heavy weights. So that was also, that broke a barrier for me. I was like, no, we can lift weights. We can. So I think it's that whole, how I work on myself, my why I was doing it, to try something new and different, to challenge myself, but then also you represent your country. It's another part as well. So the importance of having the why, so you keep going. If you just hold on to the why.
And if you can connect that too, I find like stepping out from the collective group, stepping out from your family, looking better than anyone else is like a huge choice. Like you go, oh, I'm going to be in the spotlight. And I think that's been the most difficult thing that I've come across with athletes coaching and also myself, is that taking that step and owning it and without losing the mana behind you. But I know, you know, in Polynesia, Māori's like you get the peer pressure that we put on ourselves, go, oh, you're trying to look flash, because we're so used to being humble and not looking flash, and that the language around that, you know. And so I'm like, when I see a Polynesian woman or boy in Māori step out, that takes a lot of courage, because no, that's really the mainstream they're stepping into. And that's what I mean about, like, you have to go out to give back, and it's actually a bigger give back to your community when you decide to be courageous. And I just wish there was just a little bit more, I suppose, better language and acceptance to awhi that more.
What I do for a living is interview athletes, and predominantly ones who are mixed race, or, you know, of the likes. We'll use Israel Adesanya as an example, UFC fighter, who cops it from the media all the time about, you know, being loud and obnoxious and all these sorts of things, and people have a perception of him because he's loud, because he's himself, and proudly so. And he talks about tall poppy syndrome, you know, in New Zealand, and he's trying to argue the point, this is how I roll, take it or leave it, you don't have to watch me or listen to me, that's up to you. But you're right, that humbleness in Māori, Pacific, and I think a lot of cultures, even outside of Māori and Pacifica, kind of view things the same way. And I was actually, when I was talking, listening to you two right now, talking about, you know, we go out as a we and things, is, you know, even when I ventured out to be a sports journalist, the sacrifice you have to make. And I think sometimes, I know in my family, my relationships got affected. I had 3 young children at the time, so you have the guilt, you know, of stepping out and trying to convince everyone that just, if I just do this now, I guarantee you it will all pay off. And they're just like, well, we need to pay the power and we need to do this, but you keep taking all these free jobs trying to work towards this dream, or of you know, of this broadcast thing that might not even happen. So a lot of it is a leap of faith, and sometimes for some families that's sometimes not realistic, especially if you're contributing to the collective.
It's like, how do you be out there, dream a little, go and get it, whatever you desire, but not offend. Like, you know, just, and it's, you're not doing it to like be cut off from them. It's just that, like, why can't you think and go, well, I want that. You can't sit in 2 worlds. We know that you can't be doing this and that. But if you've got a couple of people around you in your family or your collective going, just go and get it, don't worry about it, then you're away. You know, and then you just see how people thrive.
What was it for you then, in terms of, you knew, like, you believed in, was it just a belief in your goal, and that you knew you could get there, that you were willing to do all of that?
First of all, I'm stubborn. You know, I had a stubbornness that, you know, I had, you know, investing, not by financially, but I invested my time, I invested effort, I invested in, you know, becoming almost obsessed with researching and, you know, going out on shoots. And I even went to modelling to get confidence in front of a camera, you know, like looking at different ways in which I could all pull it back into this journalism thing that I wanted. And another thing that rang for me was the why. I felt that we had so many of our people who were doing amazing things in sport. Nothing against mainstream journalists or whatever. I just thought that if we had some of our people talking to our people, we can get the story. You know, we can get and not in a, you know, a paparazzi type way, but that meaningful, in-depth, we're understanding why they do what they do and how they're doing it in a way that we could translate it back to an audience, and we can get that sort of understanding. And I thought there was a big gap there. There was especially a big gap with our women. So that was my kind of why, was to, you know, and to show my tamariki, you know, yeah, we're raised in Māngere, we, you know, South Auckland, there's a stigma attached. But the one thing that our people are great at is telling stories.
You know, you're Māori, Punjab, going into an industry that there's not a lot of people that look like you. How did you navigate kind of, this is what I'm like at home and this is who I am, but then sometimes when I'm coming into my work environment, I potentially have to try and change or fit?
When I think back now, a little bit sad, you know, when you have to go to work and hang up your pōtai for the day, you know, and then retrieve it at the door on the way back out, you know, because going into a mainstream newsroom was a lot, and I didn't realise, you know, people spoke differently and they treated each other in a way that I don't usually treat people, and, you know, and it's not always nice and friendly and, you know, a bunch of roses. But I used that first experience to learn, You know, I needed to learn how these systems worked. I needed to learn how they were editing. You know, I needed to learn these little skills if I was going to progress anywhere else from there. So that was a starting point for me, whether I liked it or not. When I think back now, being thrown into the deep end worked for me, I thought. It taught me a lot about being staunch to your kaupapa. If you believed in a story, go for it. Even if you knew it was a good story, your boss didn't think it was a good story, trying to convince them that, hey, te mea, this is why, trust me. So yeah, it was learning. So using that experience to learn, as uncomfortable as it was, going to work in high heels. Like now, since I've been at Sky, I wear sneakers every day. And I feel like I've made it. You know, like I can go to work with sneakers on now. Like I've done I've done the miles and I've earned the right to wear my flats. But so that it was tough. It was culturally testing for me, coming from a kaupapa Māori environment. But I needed to learn the basics if I was ever gonna move forward, and then have a little bit of freedom to then start to pick and choose where I can go, because I'd kind of established my foundation.
Yeah. Learning the system, Jodie, you're probably like the best at learning how things actually are, and knowing what you can do, you know, previous experience, even when you're saying in like your finance roles, understanding how the world kind of works, and then trying to not manipulate it, but being smart about it. Pretty much exactly how you would on a basketball court, but realizing how you would play a game in our current system in society.
Not being in it, like going in and not knowing anything, and contributing when the opportunity comes. And when you figure out the system, you know exactly where you sit. When opportunity comes and you have an opportunity to influence or to give an opinion, and if you're smart enough and you know where it's heading, or you can talk into other people's conversations, or you know, you can give a different lens on something, that's valuable. And I think now, especially in the system, understanding that having more diversity around the table offers more options to people. Mm-hmm. So great leaders and leaders that are in systems understand that. They realise that in order to change, that's their own skill set, is to listen into the different conversations or opinions and lenses and go, okay, that's, you know, because you're giving them intel that they're not privy to. And so a good system will take that on board. And working hard and working well and just doing your job really well, and making sure that, you know, so making sure that you're just not a replaceable person, because you know, and understanding what you bring.
We're good in around this table. Do you think we're the exception of the positions that we've been able to get to in our careers and / roles, or do you think actually there should be more of us? The people who are making the decisions to get people into positions of power generally don't look like us do it. I can't remember the stats, but you know, there's research to suggest that you tend to choose people that basically look like you, or that are aligned to your kind of view of the world. I understand the individual want, like, yes, I play a role in where I want to get to, but I still have to understand that there's a whole system above me and power structures that I'm not a part of, that I have no say over, that will determine whether or not I get to a position. Do you know, even the governance.
That's what you're talking about is for myself, be honest, it wasn't a desire for me to work at Sport New Zealand, because I was working in the community at that time, because my heart is always for the people. And there were another number of times that we tried to take things to the system, because if we're talking about systems change, you know, really it is based on people. Some people have the powers, you know, the powers to make decisions, and if they're good, then they'll listen to, you know, the people about. So there were a number of times that we would take things, I guess, to where I currently work in it. People would listen, but didn't. There was no change at that time. So when I saw that there was a roll up, I thought, oh, is there change? Because it looked like there was. They were looking at something different, and I think that's where you've got the HR or the people and culture who they're now looking at, you know, diversity of thought. So if the organisation is willing then to have people come through who are diverse, I think that's a start. So I think at the time there might have been maybe 2 Pacific people I knew of that were in the Sport New Zealand part of the Sport New Zealand group, and then When I came on, then there was maybe three, and then 4. So it's just grown, and then now there's 13 of us in the Sport New Zealand group. But now we're looking at how do we cross over with our high performance. So that's been something that I've been, I guess, happy to be a part of in Sport New Zealand. Is we've starting to create a collective of us.
So you built your own table. Essentially, like if you're building it, yeah. You touched on then kind of like Ravinda, the idea that we don't not necessarily have like a leader title. You know, like not all of us will, you know, people deem that we're leaders in the sense. Talking to you earlier a little bit, Ravinda, around that, of you not realising that you are leading and we are leading in different spaces. You just don't necessarily have that as the official title. Yeah. Can you speak to actually how you're a big part and led Sky Sports' journey around like acknowledging tangata whenua and what that's actually mean for an organisation and your career?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when you asked me the question, thoughts around leadership, I'm just like, and then we start talking, I'm just like, oh yeah, we do all of that. We do all those things. But yeah, I think it's, when we think about sport in particular and the talent that we have, not only here in Aotearoa but around the world, and what our Māori and Pacific people do on that stage is crazy ridiculous. You know, like how do we have all this talent around everywhere, and yet our structures don't reflect that in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that it's wrong, I'm saying it can be better. And so I've always been quite adamant about where I can inject kaupapa Māori in my mahi, that I will. I have to think about being palatable to a predominantly Pākehā audience. And that's what you get, when you're dealing in subscriptions and things like that. But where I can, I will, but not because I've ever been put in that position to do it. Not that I've ever been told to do it. It's because I know I can, and that word responsibility has stuck with me. I feel a responsibility to be able to do that. That I came from Māngere, I'm Māori, I'm Punjabi, and another little girl from the same community I came from can look at me and go, yep, that's me. I can do that too. But yeah, it's that responsibility really. But in an organisation like Sky, who are now, making conscious effort to incorporate a Māori strategy into its kaupapa, and it is things like changing wordings and job descriptions and changing wordings in policy, where we are using some Māori kupu, some Pasifika kupu, because of when we're putting out those words, those are the people that are going to come in. So it's kind of rethinking how we put ourselves out to the world, not only as entertainment or sport and entertainment, but as an organisation that is based here in New Zealand.
Do you, as a current athlete, Jason, feel like you have to still kind of act as a role model for women in sport?
Yeah, most definitely. I think more because you're always being watched, right? Everyone is watching you. People that you don't think are watching you, but they're seeing everything that you do. So it's like you have to have that self-awareness of like, okay, yes, I'm in my zone, maybe like as an athlete, but I still need to hold myself to this standard or this level, or, behave a certain way. Because I've got younger generations looking at me, I've got younger girls looking like that. So it's like, well, what am I teaching them through what I am role modeling on the court of how I behave? But then also, not just younger girls, like my teammates, and then it's like the management, and then it's like you're on TV, so it's like, what is everyone else on TV seeing? And then I think too, it's like, because female athletes are becoming more popular, it's like, when I'm performing, what am I showing that female athletes are, And I don't necessarily care about what other people think, but I do care what I'm showing, because that shows what I care about myself and who I am as a person, and I think that is important.
The advice for people wanting to go over and do something similar to you over in the States, what would it be like for our young Pacifica and Māori women that want to go and pursue a sporting career over there? What kind of advice would you give them?
I think our biggest thing is your why. And your why might not be the same, but you need to have a why you're going over. And then I think knowing your personal goals and where you're at. So it's going and doing your research about schools, the system over there, because it is a lot different to the system over here. So it's knowing what you want from that, and are you going to be a good fit, because you're packing up your whole life and you're going by yourself into a new system, and they're going to break and mold you into what they want. And so it's like, do I want to be associated with that? Do I want to be like these people at this school, or do I want to go here? Because then you're shaping your future, right? And how you see everything else, and kind of those things that you learn. So I will say, be realistic about where you're at as well, where you're at, what you are wanting to achieve, and don't worry about what anyone else thinks of where you're going. You know, what matters most to you, that's going to help you and your why get what you need from that.
I think sport is going to get, and is trying to get, as you look around the world and in New Zealand, more reflective of society. So it's happening, you know. And then, you talk about like, you fell into this role, I fell into this role. We like something about it, and then we realise, that it's bigger than us. So our why, we can associate back, forward, and I think that's really important, and that's why we're in these positions. And yes, we are role models, but that's not why we pick the jobs up, put the hat on. It's not the accolade stuff, it's purposeful. And I think there's a lot of integrity around us being leaders, because we're always making sure that the elders, our parents, checking us that it's all good. You know, we don't do anything that's going to put them in a bad light. So, I think just it'll happen, and it'll be more reflective of society. And then what is our role and our place? And then if we choose to go up, that's a bit, you best be putting on your best boots too, because it's not easy.
Pulling everyone up.
Pulling everyone up.
Yeah. The more
But
of
you
guys.
got to go up and like be in that. You got to work that first.
Do I like it?
Well, it's just
do I like it up here or not?
The choice.
Yeah.
You stay or go. It's not for me. And I think we have to be honest about that. Like, if you're going to make change, you got to keep going up, because it all comes back down.
And leading in our own different spaces. To your point, Jason, too, it's like individually you can lead, but you're also conscious of that you're pulling everyone with you. And when you do get to those levels, it is a hand down and pulling everyone up that looks, that kind of represents us to do that. So thank you for finishing on that, Jodie. And thank you all very much for actually giving up your time real randomly to come in and have a good chat around leadership and governance. So thank you.